Eric and Kate, are you here? I see your cameras.
Actually here, yeah.
Perfect. And Eric, I heard your voice before you're here.
Yep, I'm here as well. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Since it looks like most of us are gathered, I know Mauricio can't come. Why don't we go ahead to use our time wisely? The first item on our, I should say, I am calling to order the meeting of the Committee for Family Forestlands, a special meeting today, November 6th. The first item on our agenda is the review of the agenda. Do people have comments? If not, we'll do roll call. Heather, if you could do the roll call, I'd appreciate that.
Yep. Amanda Sullivan Astor, David Bugney,
Present by video.
Eric Kranzish,
Present.
Gary Jensen. I think he's here. He might just be maybe having audio issues. Glenn Ahrens,
Here.
Julie Woodward,
Here. Good morning.
Kayola Swanson, Kate McMichael,
Here.
Maurizio Valerio, Rick Zen,
Here.
and Wendy Gerlach.
Here. Thanks, Heather. The first item on our agenda is the technical guidance document review. And to kick that off, I'll just note that I think a number of us have provided written comments into Heather. And some of us, I think, will probably want to give verbal comments right now. Mike, I see Mike is in the conference room, right?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah. Good morning, Mike. I thought I'd ask you, Mike, if you had a way, if you wanted to start with our verbal comments, perhaps, and then we could switch to any questions that the department might have about the written comments that were submitted. But do you have a way you'd like to approach it, Mike?
Let's just go ahead with the verbal comments and let Heather capture those. And then I just to let you know, I have not seen the written comments yet, so just be aware of that.
Kate?
And if we haven't already submitted written comments, I didn't have time to actually put too much focus on this until yesterday, but I do have written comments for both agenda items. Can I send them after?
Yeah, you should be able to, and I can just get them over to Josh.
Great.
All right. Thanks for that clarification, Kate. All right. Perhaps we should start with the technical guidance on S-fish, if that works for people.
And Wendy, before we get too far,
Oh, sure.
have some members of the public.
Oh. Good ideas. Let's take a pause in terms of just identifying. Oh, and also note that for our roll call that Amanda is here now. Members of the public, if you're present, if you could turn on your camera and introduce yourself, and we have time for brief comments if anyone would like to make a comment.
Yes, this is Lynn McDonald. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right. I'm just a small landowner, just learning about things, and I thought I saw this on the agenda, and I thought I'd join in just to see what you have going on.
Thanks for joining us. Your audio was a little cut out a little bit, but I think I heard that you're just a small forest landowner and you'd like to hear what's going on. So thank you for being here. Any other members of the public?
This is Sharon Waterman, and I'm in the same position. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for being here.
This is Margaret Miller. I'm an agency partner just listening in.
All right. Which agency?
Department of Environmental Quality.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Thanks for the reminder, Heather. I thought we might start with S-fish just because I have that up on my screen. Have others been able to pull that up? Oh, Kayola is also joining right now for the roll call purposes.
Hi, so sorry to be late. Small dog emergency.
Welcome. We're just starting to look at SFIsh technical guidance, Keola. And people are going to give their verbal comments on the technical guidance. Then afterwards, there's still time to send in written comments if you members of the committee would like to do that. All right, I open it up for comments on SFIsh.
So I have kind of a general comment that in some ways could go for several of them. One of my, actually it was a question, because it felt like we had like the RCA one, like we had two different versions, one that looked like more picture version, and like this SFIsh one was a bit of both, where it was text and then pictures at the end. So wondering what the final actual form was going to look like. Because are we really doing reflection on the verbiage or on what the final, like, because the pictures are pretty awesome, although sometimes it felt like these were the source, well, for RCA, it felt like this was the source document, and then there was the more picture version. And so I was just wondering what that process was.
I can go ahead and address that. So yeah, so there's actually two, technically for RCAs, there's kind of three products. So there's the technical guidance, which is the more formal product that we're producing, stakeholder engagement, but we also produced a form, which is to help landowners actually complete the road condition assessment, which that's actually something you all had an opportunity to I mean, it's changed, through time, but you got an opportunity to actually see that quite some time ago in an early version. And then there's the how-to guide, which is kind of the illustrated guide that really is that's what will help the landowner complete that RCA form. Like if they're using the form, they can reference that how-to guide to basically step them through that. So it's truly three products. And like I said, the technical guidance is the more formal. It's something that, just is, like say, a little bit more technical, I guess, maybe in nature, even since it is a technical guidance.
Okay.
Thanks, Josh.
All three are open for, in terms of what you've looked at and reviewing, even right now, you still have a chance to. And there's some inconsistencies between the three just because they've kind of been produced on some different timelines, and so we'll have to go through and make sure everything aligns between all three of those products. That is something that we'll do here in the final hours.
Well, so a couple of things I kind of noted as imagining I was someone wanting to apply for this. So like there's that application form that sort of follows the project development assessment and the completion, but it came much earlier in the actual document. And it's like you had to read both paragraphs to know that you only completed it after you were confirmed that you met program requirements. So wondering if it would be valuable to place it differently in the order of things so that people do things in the correct order. That was, and then there was one where there was a form, a figure 10, but I think that you actually meant figure 9 because there is no figure 10, and it was actually the field form. And showing the forms, and several places you show the forms first and then have the information that's going to complete them following it, except on, I think maybe not on that one. So I think it's helpful if people see the form and then they get the help to complete it, rather than the help to complete the form followed by the form, if that makes sense. That's my teacher brain. So I could be wrong, but that's I kind of look at everything as a former teacher.
And one thing I'd like to comment, especially with regards to the SFIsh technical guidance. So in terms of like what a landowner is going to have to do, like say more independently, the only thing that would the landowner would have to do, and it's still not even going to be necessarily independent on their own, but it's simply the application, the application form. And then of course, part of that application process really is the road condition assessment as well. But everything else you see in that SFISH technical guidance, it's a stewardship forester or an SFO forester who's going to be doing that, is going to obviously coordinate with the landowner for access to come out and do those assessments. But it's truly, it's going to be ODF doing those. Unless a landowner wants to, try and do it themselves or wants to hire a consultant. But really the intent there is that's what we ODF staff is going to be doing when they come out on the ground to collect the necessary data to verify that it's an eligible project, and also to take some data back to the program so the program can actually, prioritize, rank the project and provide that information to the review committee.
I had the same thought that Kate had a bit about some of the ordering of like the application and evaluation process, and that's in my written comments. But as to what you were just saying, I had noted the line under the overview where it says the technical guidance does not address the project development process or grant recipient responsibilities, which is, it's clear now what you meant. And maybe for those landowners who might pick this up and think, how can this be helpful to me? If you could include in that overview another sentence maybe that encapsulates what you just said, that would be helpful.
And to follow up on that, Wendy, early on, this wasn't really intended to be a external document necessarily, but I do think there's value in the transparency of how we're getting to the decisions that we're making. So there's great value there. And then yes, in your to your comments, your written comments, and then just to you and Kate's comments with regards to the landowner and kind of what they need to do. Yes, there will be additional, like grant recipient guidelines, guidance. A lot of that will be spelled out in the grant agreement itself, but we will produce additional, kind of how to, if I receive one of these grants, what do I have to do? What's that process look like? It is going to vary between project types and complexity and all those things, but we will definitely have some generalized guidance in terms of, how do I use Oregon buys to submit, a reimbursement pay or, for payment and those things. I mean, those will be products as well, and we'll probably have videos that also help with that and show what a valid what a receipt needs to look like for us to be able to actually reimburse you for those costs that were incurred. So those are products that will come hopefully sooner than later, but definitely a little bit behind on those products.
Mm-hmm.
One other suggestion, I really appreciate all the flow diagrams and the different, especially the RCA ones, super easy to read. Just sort of a decision matrix. I think as you finalize this and make it more public, the more you can link the, when it references like using available technical information, or the more you can directly link to the pages in the technical guidance or to the better. But it's all.
Other comments?
I had a question regarding the term associated with parcel coming out of the Coos Bay training for the PFA process. I think there was some mixed confusion over what the landowner thinks a parcel is compared to what the agency thinks a parcel is. I believe the agency is looking at as encompassing the total ownership of an individual. Was kind of some of the conversations out of the Coos Bay meeting. However, the way I read the definition of parcel, I view that to be more associated directly with the harvest unit and the tax lots associated with where the harvest is occurring. And I just wanted to make sure I'm on the record as saying, as an advocate for the small woodland community, asking the small woodland community to do an RCA for their entire ownership prior to harvest is a large undertaking for some folks who may have more than just 20 or 40 acres. And some of those folks may actually require some of the harvest revenue from their operation to do the improvements associated with an RCA. So I just wanted to make sure that when the department interprets the definition of a parcel, that is more closely aligned with the tax lots under which the harvest operation would be conducted.
Thanks. Good point. And I think that partly runs through a number of these documents, but was most significant for the road condition assessment. If I wasn't hearing other comments on SFISH, maybe we should jump over and just talk about the road condition assessment. So last call for comments on S-Fish.
Can I make one more
Okay,
quick one?
of course.
There were a number of places where I think the use of the term maintenance versus improvements was getting confounded in the document. In the world of road management, maintenance is different than an improvement. An improvement is a capital allocation, and a maintenance, those are just things you do as part of your operation. So for example, there's places where they talk about repairs or a maintenance obligation versus an improvement. If we could create some common language there that aligns with how the rest of the world looks at road maintenance versus road improvements, I think there'd be some value there.
Good point. Thank you. Other comments on road condition assessment?
Hey, Wendy, I had a comment on S-Fish.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
So just for the record, Amanda Sullivan-Astor with Associated Oregon Loggers, and similar to Keola, I'm sorry for being late, a few minutes there. So got caught up in Ledge Days stuff. I just wanted to ask, Josh, I appreciate all the work that you've done on the S-Fish technical guidance. And I just wanted to clarify for Associated Oregon Loggers members who do consulting work as a part of their business with small woodland owners. I missed the last meeting or two. So is this technical guidance, the way that I read it, it's there's some parts that are more technical and some parts in this that are less technical. It seems very process oriented. Is there going to be additional documentation that comes out for consulting foresters and for operators that do consulting work to that'll be more geared to that audience as opposed to this, which seems a little bit more focused on internal staff?
And maybe just to follow up for some clarification there. I mean, are you talking in terms of like design specifications, how to install a fish culvert and those types of things? Is that what you're referencing, Amanda, or something different?
No, for somebody who might be interested in helping a landowner apply for this, there's some level of specificity in this technical guidance, but I could see a member having additional questions, or there's a lot of words in here. And so kind of like Kate was saying, it sounds like there's different types of documents. So just wondering if there's going to be something with that audience in mind in particular, or if because this typically technical guidance has been kind of kept behind closed doors as an ODF resource. And so is there something like this, or is this going to be available to the public on the website?
No, this is a public will be a public document. Yes. And so that's required to have stakeholder input. That's why we're doing this today, or through this process over the last month or so. But so yes, this will be a public document.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. More comments on road condition assessment from anyone?
Yes, this is Sharon Waterman. My husband had a question.
Yes, I was at the PFA Coos Bay meeting, and they indicated we didn't have to record the ditch water crossings. And then when I started filling out the form with the Stuart Forester, he said that I needed to fill out each one of those water crossings. But I really had the idea that we'd just fill out the intermittent, perennial, and fish streams would be the only ones we fill out for. I need a clarification on what culverts I need to record on the form.
I can address that. And yeah, thanks, Charlie, for the question. And yeah, I think it was probably you and I who you chatted there and asked about that. And yes, so no, in terms of if it's a typed stream, so if it's a type N or a type F or SSBT stream, we need that water crossing location and an evaluation of this, that, the status of that culvert. If it is simply a cross drain, a ditch relief culvert, no, we do not need that. And so I can make sure that we get, I add clarification for the stewardship foresters. I've emphasized that a few times, but so it's maybe just still a little bit of folks not quite understanding exactly what we need to capture there. So I'll make sure to hit that one again in this training that's coming up next week, or here in 2 weeks, I guess. And I can reach out to Coos Bay as well, Charlie.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
I had a comment on the road condition assessment, which is relates to this section. When should I use the assessment? And for conservation owners, it's often important to know about like operation stays that are funded by NRCS or grants like that, like for doing like restoration of riparian hardwoods that might involve taking material out. And so to me, like where it says here that it has to be submitted with a notification of operation that includes the harvest of timber or when you're applying for SFIsh. But I thought it might be useful after your example of operations that require an RCA to put some examples of things that don't require an RCA. And I think to someone who knows exactly what the definition of quote harvest is and when you have to submit a notification, that might be clear. But depending on your audience, I think from my perspective, conservation owners would benefit from a statement of what kinds of, say, resilience or mitigation or restoration activities don't require or don't trigger the RCA, especially if there's not going to be any money generated by the activity. It could be expensive to have to do the assessment.
So Wendy, I can make a comment on that. So in terms of like, if someone's going into ferns to notify, which they would be doing if they're submitting a notification for an activity that includes the harvest of timber, Ferns is going to tell them, basically Ferns is going to tell them whether or not they need to submit an RCA when they go through that process. It will have that functionality in there. Obviously, yes, we have the other path, the other time it's required, which is SFIsh, which will be outside of Ferns, but that's just going to be through that application process that we'll get that RCA done and tied to that application. And then if a landowner simply wants to complete an RCA, they can do that, right? They can do it so that's, I remember I saw one of your comments. Voluntarily doing that is different than, even SFIsh. SFIsh isn't a voluntary thing. It's a requirement to be part of the program. You have to do that RCA. But yeah, so they'll be able to do them independently of either SFIsh or Ferns. And that will simply just be we'll have a website, they'll be able to download the form, and then at this point, they will just simply email that back to the SFO office. So I don't know if that, and I can try and maybe better, we didn't necessarily have, say, that website in place when I did the original draft of the RCA form. So I can easily put that in there now and even have a link to the web page where they could go and get an RCA form and download it and get it back to us through independently of either Ferns or the SFIsh program.
Yeah, I guess like very big picture, what I think is important in these kinds of guidance, again, it depends who your audience is, but to me, I would think that it should be really clear when the threshold is, when you need to be involved in this activity at all, and when you need to start thinking about the requirements. So I still think that when I use the assessment section of the RCA, could be beefed up a little bit just to let people know when they should start looking in the notification system or get into Ferns or whatever. With that comment, I will turn to Julie.
Thanks, Wendy. I'd like to circle back to the comment that Eric brought up about the parcel, because this is I guess just curious if the ODF has a response to that on the pathway that they see moving forward, because this is a really big difference in the conversations of where we started, even when we were putting together the illustrated manual on helping landowners think they were only responsible for doing the area that their unit or their haul routes, compared to doing their entire property or parcel. That's a lot different of a request. And just curious, since that conversation's come up in Coos Bay and we've had conversations after, if there's been any resolution or the path forward that we're going to be taking.
Mike, do you want to take that one or do you want me to?
Go first, Josh. I'll see what you say, but yeah, go ahead.
So, parcel is the key word, right? That's in the rule. And so the rule is clear on, it's all the roads in the parcel where the harvest activity will occur. And so that's how we're administering the program, is based on how that rule is written. And then of course the rule also indicates that, that it's encouraged for landowners to assess the roads that are in other parcels that they may own where the operation is not occurring. So it's really clear in rule. And so that's how, we're currently administering the rule and the program when it comes to RCAs.
If I could jump in and ask, how does that relate to the transport, the road that's used for transport from a harvest parcel to another place?
So
was
Eric,
that clear?
well, no, and Eric, that was one of his comments, which is an interesting, element or kind of a, yeah, in terms of, obviously, if you have more than one parcel and you happen to, your operation is in one parcel, you're hauling through another ownership, and then you're back into a parcel that you own. The way the RCA rule is written, in that other parcel that your operation is not occurring in, you're still hauling logs in there. Technically, the way the rule reads, that does not need to be included in RCA. However, that is still part of the overall notification process. That road is still subject to, PFA administrative rules. And so, weather haul rules still apply, maintenance rules still apply, but it does not need to be included on that RCA.
Thank you. Eric?
Thank you for that, Josh. I appreciate that. I know these rules were pulled primarily from Washington in this section, and Washington does interpret that differently. And so I'd encourage ODF to maybe look at opportunities to reinterpret that rule language differently, to be less onerous to a small woodland owner. My fear is that, unduly burdening folks with larger road condition assessment analyses than are pertinent to their harvest unit may push a few landowners to either say, I can't afford this, so I'm just not going to do it, or to walk away from land ownership in total. And that's, I think, what we want to discourage, in my opinion. And so I would encourage you to look at opportunities there to potentially interpret the definition of parcel in a way that's less onerous to the small woodland owner.
Thanks. Kate?
So first, I have a stupid question. Is that, because I kept looking, is the form actually, was that in something we got, the actual RCA form? Because that's one, I know that question has come up at other trainings, because we hosted a training like a week or so ago and it still wasn't available. And that's where I was, so I've been wondering about that. And I know that's a question that's come up. So did I miss seeing the actual form?
Yeah, it's in, I think, the first or second appendix in the technical guidance. I'm scrolling through right now.
Because I certainly didn't, okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, it's actually Appendix A in the technical guidance is the form as it was on the date, at least, that we submitted it. So the current version of the form from back in last month or September, when I provided this, is, yes, it's in the stuff we provided.
So okay, I will go and scroll back through them again, because I thought I had done all the pages of the last thing I downloaded, but it could have been missing from that. A couple of other just use comments, thinking from a user, if this is a small woodland owner looking at this. One, there are lots of links to the rules, but every single one takes you to page 1 of the rules, and it's 138 pages. And if it could be helpful, even if you just told people what page they should look at in the rules, that could be helpful, just because I look at that wall of words and my brain kind of starts to short out. And so it could be a nice thing to do, just add, go to this page or go to this section. Because if you haven't spent a lot of time with the sort of newsprint version, it's a lot. And then just another sort of general question, the ordering of the sections, because I think overall, like I'm thinking of the PDF one, not the Word document version. The PDF one I thought was a great document, but it felt like the ordering didn't make sense necessarily to me of just the different sections, because it's like, why roads matter, here's what you need to do as a small forest landowner, maybe here's when you need to take that step further to create this, here's what a road is and what a road isn't. But it didn't seem like, so it was just some of the ordering seemed a little awkward to me. Although you can't, if you have this not as if you have it as a physical document, you can always flip through those different parts. But it was, so that was just a comment.
Thanks, Kate. Julie.
Thanks, Wendy. Josh and ODF, I just want to also get a little clarification. I've heard verbally that there would be exemptions to the RCA, such as if there was hazard trees or, something like a windstorm or something where it was more of an emergency natural disaster type of thing, where a stewardship forester could help, give agreement to delay that if it was more of a, natural disaster type impact. But I haven't seen any of that type of language to do exemption. I'm just curious if that conversation has come up or if that is in there and I just missed it.
I have not heard or had discussions with regards to any sort of exemption from an RCA. I don't know, Mike, is that something you can speak to?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that either. We may have to circle back to Scott, maybe see if he may be working on something like that in his guidance for natural disasters and stuff like that. I have not heard anything, Julie.
And Kate, back to yours, just so I can make sure I got my notes written down here right. We're in terms of the ordering, I know there's I've struggled and changed things and reordered things a few different times. And was that more in a specific reference to the illustrated how-to guide, or was that in reference to the technical guidance, or both?
I think it was more the illustrated one. It was the PDF version that had more pictures than anything else. And I wanted to give an apology because I stopped looking after references somehow and didn't go through further. So apology. There's a lot of this. So just knowing that, because I was paying attention, I thought, and I missed things. So being prepared that I may not be the only one that does that. So the paper forms are probably going to be it's going to be, and something that's physical is going to be easier unless there's some kind of note of, okay, the end isn't really here, even though there's only one line on this page. But my fault, my bad there.
I see two hands up. Eric?
Quick question and something that I didn't see in either the RCA or the SFISH document. There isn't a lot of discussion around or awareness of in-stream work windows associated with when someone would have to do their culvert replacement project for fish or bridge. And so I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to include that in here for small forest landowners who would have to time their harvest unit associated with in-stream work windows associated with SFISH.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So in-water work plan and all the timing. So we have a separate technical guidance that's in draft right now that I developed here a while back. And so it'll be a separate thing. We can reference it in the SFISH and or RCA technical guidance. And then just another clarification there on that, Eric. So, one thing with SFISH, you know, it's a grant program, and this is a to another, I think probably same comment that may have been tied to that same comment that you had in the written comments you provided. You know, SFISH is a grant program. You know, it's not, I'm going to try and make it as nimble as possible, but, you know, really you know, we're going to try and be proactive, identify things, and then go through a process. And so landowners, you know, likely going to have to wait a certain amount of time. So actually often tying a SFISH delivered project to, say, an actual harvest operation is often, you know, it's probably rarely going to happen that way. It's just, you know, it's just not nimble enough to be able to do that, unfortunately. You know, we can talk a little bit more about that because there's some details there that, or I can even just provide them in an email, Eric, on, or even to CFF as a whole with regards to kind of some of those nuances and how we may have to deal with, you know, culverts that are imminent risk of failure that are in the program, and, you know, what do we do then, and those types of things. And because I think there are some details there that are important, but they're very hard to say capture in a technical guidance. But at any rate, so I can definitely provide some additional comment in writing or something with specific reference to that if folks would like.
I thought that on page like 23 of the RCA, there's a reference to SFISH. And again, I think to me, that's a place where a couple extra sentences would be helpful, saying some of the stuff you just said. Amanda?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. So I went through and just was looking at the links. And so I did just follow up with Kate's comment in the chat. The links for the rules are currently going to the July 2023 rules that specify the difference between July 2023 and January 2024. So we probably need to update that in the how-to guide to the January 2024, seeing as none of this applied as of July 2023. So I just want to highlight that. And then all the SFISH links go to a 404 error page. So those need to be updated. And then when I was looking at the locate Oregon, I've got it up right now. I looked at the layers list and the legend, and it's not showing any of the stream layers on there. So I don't know if that's just an issue with locate Oregon right now. But I would imagine that we want to make sure that folks have access to see where they have streams under the current stream layers, what those types are, because all of that kind of ties into the RCA and the SFISH program. So just making sure that those links are accessible in those documents for the stream typing, and especially as that gets updated throughout the different phases of the typing process, especially for perenniality and all that as well.
Thanks, Amanda. And yeah, definitely, especially on the how-to guide and some of those links, and then even the RCA form itself. There are earlier versions that got tied to this in a short amount of time that I had to kind of get all this together. And even, you know, even after this, obviously things will change. So that form that you see and the material that I provided is going to change some based off of our comments here today and written comment. And then, yeah, we'll make sure we get all those resources, those links hopefully updated, and make sure they're actually real. I'm going to some place that's useful and not just a dead link. So thanks, though.
Other comments on road condition assessment? Not hearing any. I propose we hop over to the tax credit guidance. All right. Comments on this? I have I feel like asking this question, maybe I completely missed something, but to me, I thought there was a tax credit for the band between minimum practice and the standard practice for large landowners. That was 100% of the timber value, but isn't there also a dry channel option that's for 50% of the timber value? I just was wondering about that, and it didn't think that came across clearly in the document.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think there were a number of areas where some things got lost in the text that I think some call outs or some visuals might be helpful. That was one of them. I do think having something that would help clarify the different percentages of stumpage value that are available and how or when those would come into play would be something that would be useful. But yes, we have 100%, and that would be the standard tax credit. That we have the 125% if the watershed cap has been reached. And then we have also 125%, though would be I think the percentage of folks who would be eligible for this would be incredibly small, would folks who have a significantly disproportionately impacted parcel. They can get that a tax credit 125% as well. And then we have the 50% dry channel area. So those would be the different percentages we would be dealing with stumpage value. And I think also on stumpage value, it would be probably behoove us all to have it maybe called out in a different way, though it's in there in terminology, making sure that everyone is very clear that this is regarding when we talk about stumpage value, it's the value of the standing trees minus all of the harvest and delivery after. So it's really the net sort of net profit someone would get from those trees. So I feel like that also got a little bit lost based on some of the comments. So yeah, thank you for that. And since I'm speaking, I want to thank everyone for their time and attention and review of this. And I apologize for missing the previous meeting due to illness. And I do think it'd be helpful to just know at the time that this was provided, there were some specific sections or information that was intentionally omitted just because we had some lingering policy or system functionality questions that have since been addressed. So I do have some areas I'd be happy to cover if they aren't talked about in or aren't questioned, just in case anyone is interested, as well as some attachments that would be going with this document.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for your work on it. I realize I probably should have introduced you and then had you give your overview first. So sorry that I jumped in first.
No problem.
If there are other department people who would like to give a little intro, you could do that now. Otherwise, we can jump to Amanda.
Giving a pause there. Anybody else wanted to jump in the silence. One thing I just wanted to highlight on page 8, it has a heading called Methods of Professional Foresters. Mm-hmm. I would suggest changing that title. There's certified foresters and there's registered foresters in other states. We don't have that here in Oregon. And there's a lot of people that know how to cruise timber who may not consider themselves professional foresters. They didn't go to school for forestry. And so that might be a little degrading to people calling it that. So I would probably focus more on, the methods that we're talking about for cruising and appraising, rather than specifying somebody's, job title in that. And just kind of, other places in the document that might reference that. Just want to highlight that because a lot of our members are going to be able to do that work. In addition to some small woodland owners, it's, more of a learned skill versus you have to go get a degree to become a professional forester to do that.
Thank you for
that.
That
is a good, yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking it's just a little awkward because it could just say they're required to use professional standard measuring techniques instead of saying the professional forester, whatever. So thank you, Amanda. Other comments?
I'm not totally sure, given what Abigail said, sort of what state this is in, like where we are in sort of the process with, is this internal, is this getting ready for publication? So I don't want to jump the gun on, I really appreciate how much is here and how detailed it is. And I think my hope would be that as it becomes more public facing, it looks a little bit more like the RCA with screenshots and diagrams, and you may be planning to do all of that. So I don't want to redundantly suggest something you've already said you'll do, but I do feel like it's still it's a lot to get through, as Kate said, and if we can simplify it and make it a little bit more like how to follow along, that would be my overarching suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And the plan would be to have some few more visuals as we finalize some pieces of the process, especially regarding ferns and how some of this will be accessed. But I do think also just based on some of the feedback and also just, as it is a lot of information to review, I think having one of the additional plans would be having sort of a really short sort of executive summary after the background section, just to really clearly sort of outline for folks what the process is, or just to be able to do a real quick snapshot of what this process looks like. One of the attachments that will be going along with this would also be what we're using as our welcome letter, which is kind of does that as well, but it would be something that recipients of the program receive after notifying of their intent to access the credit. But I think that's a great piece of advice. And I do think some additional visuals and some of the things that are lost based on the comments from in the text, I think would be helpful. So definitely some plans around how to pull out some critical information and make it maybe a little bit more accessible to folks.
Yeah, I have a sympathy for taking something this technical and trying to describe it accurately in a summary. That's just a very difficult thing to do, because if you summarize it, then people say, oh, you said it was this other way, and it ends being inaccurate. And I think that one way to sometimes be helpful and avoid that problem is to provide like an example, like you were saying, of the 3 situations where you'd have the minimum option and the standard large landowner option and the dry channel and the disproportionate impact. Just give a little example of what might be the most common situations for each of those, where you're not saying this applies to everyone, but you give like just a little example that could help people understand when it might apply to them or when they might want to use this. Julie.
Thanks, Abigail. Great first work at this. I've seen a lot of work going on with this area. One thing I really like the draft workflow, that kind of summary. I think a lot of people are drawn to that. Just as Amanda brought up, I do think there's going to be times that they're going to be using a professional forester or other forester potentially to help them. And so it may just be that we want to be really clear to write ODF forester when you're referring to the stewardship forester, or to put stewardship forester, just so if a landowner is reading this, that they're thinking my forester or me, or, just to be really clear whether it's a landowner or whether it's the stewardship forester, because I think this process in particular, there could be other foresters involved in the process. So just that suggestion to be clear when it's the ODF or stewardship forester.
That's great clarification. Thank you.
Anyone? I'm scrolling through my comments to see if I have more comments. So if someone wants, I'm going to take my eyes off her screen, but if you have something to say, please just speak up. You don't have to raise your hand.
Well, in the absence of any comments, I'll just throw out there too, if it's all right, Wendy. I just wanted to note, I know we did have a number of questions or concerns related the actual text of the rule, and definitely understandable. Some of it is a little bit challenging to get through. I think I do have feel it important to provide that rule as currently written. But my hope is that taking some of the comments we have and making some alterations, that the comments that were made related to the rule language specifically will be addressed in other ways while still keeping the actual rule language as written.
Mm-hmm. I think having good links could be useful there, like we were saying on the prior review.
One suggestion I was thinking of is, when I was reading through all the voluminous documents here, is that OFRI's always done an amazing job of creating an illustrated Forest Practices Act, user's guide. And I'm just wondering if something like that, I mean, their graphics are so well done, and it's written in a way that the common person can really, understand what's going on without getting into the weeds too much. And so I was wondering, is that something that OFRI would dovetail with regards to all this information to eventually create? And if so, when do you think that would be available?
Hi, Dave. Yeah, we've been working on that closely with the department for like the last 6 months. So a lot of this is we can't finalize until some of these conversations and some of the rules are finalized. And just that's been a part of our helping interpret or understand as the department has also rolled things out. So the technical guidance is really important for that, for the technical guidance, and then we can take those and help bring those forward. But just as Abigail was saying, some of this is so technical than compared to what we've had in the past. So it will take us a little longer to make sure that what we're saying is accurate. So we're hoping to have it out early 2024, but I'm making no promises of yet. But we have a lot of it completed. The department's been integral and really an important part of that partnership. And we'd love to have it out soon. But as we've noted today, there's a lot of details here we're trying to still work through and think of how can we help make that visually happen for landowners.
Because I just think about, when you go to tree school or whatever it is, the meeting places are ways that the small woodland, small forest landowner is going to get this information. That document's always there. I mean, you've always got stacks of it, or some people can get it. And so I'm just thinking of the best way to, because there's people who still don't know the PFA exists. So I mean,
Yeah.
somehow broach that subject, but then how do you get it out to the person that it lives off grid or whatever? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really important document, but so these technical guidances are also really important to make sure that they're in place. So what we're interpreting in the manual has also gone interpreting from what the public input such as today. So it's a continual process of getting, we have the rules and then the technical guidance and then interpreting those technical guidance into that for landowners. So we appreciate the long-term partnership to get those out.
I really agree about how helpful, like especially the maps. I've been looking at this map, everyone loves this kind of map. And a map like that specifically, so for SFOs, that could show like this is the zone in which you could do the tax credit, or this is this SFIsh opportunity, or this is a place where the parcel you'd have to do the RCA for if you're going to be doing a harvest operation. I know that's a ton of work, but the maps are certainly useful. Amanda?
Yeah, I just wanted to see if there was going to be anything in this specific technical guidance on the eligibility around the percentage of a watershed that is able to utilize the credit and how that works as far as the first come, first serve. And is that going to be included in this, or is that going to be in a different technical guidance?
No, we're going to go ahead and add that specifically into this one because it does touch FCTC so clearly. So it will be a section related to understanding how that calculation will happen, how folks will be made aware of whether or not that cap has been reached. So that will be part of this specific document.
Great, yeah, because I just, you read this, and if somebody gets the response from ODF that you're not eligible, it's like, wait, what? I think that would be helpful information.
Yeah, that is important to add.
Wendy, could I ask, I forgot when we were going over SFIsh, I did have one question for you on your written comments, just to help me better understand and make sure that I'm not like trying to create something bigger or smaller than it should be. But you made a comment about, let me read it here. So
this could be anything. I haven't read it in a while.
Well,
I hope it makes sense.
Accountability metrics. And I just didn't know if that meant like in terms of like what the program's actually funding versus like accountability metrics, like when the projects that get assessed and how many are determined to be eligible, and if it's like accountability metrics for our stewardship foresters. Well, yeah, just exactly what was your intent there on that comment?
That's embarrassing because accountability metrics sounds like such jargon, and I don't know what I meant. And can I follow up with you, because I commented a little while ago and I can't remember what I meant, but I will try and provide you more meaningful comment when I follow up with you directly.
Yeah, that works.
Okay, thank you. leaving a little space for anyone who wants to comment on any of the technical guidance we looked at. I guess my overall comment would be lots of great detail as well as overview, and the charts, like with process charts, were one of my favorite things. Was like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 with the arrows. I really appreciated those graphics. Any other overall comments or thoughts people want to add on this? We have a few minutes. At 10 o'clock we switch to Ben Domling, who I think is on the call. If not, thank you, everyone. Thanks, department folks, for all the hard work on this great material. And thank you, everyone on the committee, for looking at it and providing comments. And thank you, Josh, maybe a special nod to you and also to Abigail.
Yeah, and I would just echo that and back to all of you for taking the time and helping us with these super important and much appreciated.
Thank you all for your time and attention. And again, if there's any additional comments that come after that, please just let us know, and we're happy to incorporate that or circle back if we have questions.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Wendy?
Oh, yes, Glenn.
Yeah, before we leave, I just have one overarching question. Given how, rapidly the technical guidance along with the rules have been developed, what's the outlook for, the timeline and the, possible revision or refinement of those guides over time, and how you see that working? Because I'd imagine, as quickly as this has to be developed, that there'll be a need for that. Even once they're released and the foresters are starting to apply them and then things come up, just, what's the outlook on revision or adjustments as time goes by?
And I'll make a quick comment, at least kind of what I see the strategy as, but I do know, in terms of technical guidance, they're a defined thing and rule now. They do require stakeholder input. So, there are some things that may process-wise that may limit how frequently we maybe update things. But, in terms of for like SFIsh and RCAs, these are new programs, right? They're new requirements, new rules, just as you mentioned. And so, yeah, we're going to learn a lot here in the first year, right? And so I expect, revisions to be needed for both RCAs and especially for SFIsh when it kind of comes to process. I mean, I'm still even developing policies and procedures to actually be able to deliver these projects. So I would envision SFIsh for sure, and likely RCAs, that there'll be some changes that will occur here, next year. But like I say, I do know that there's a process that will have to be tied to that, and exactly what that looks like and how long that takes, and if that inhibits the frequency of updating or not, that's something we got to figure out.
Yeah, and I would just add on to, I think, just at least for the FCTC program specifically, it's been my intention at the 3-month mark and the 6-month mark to be reevaluating what we're needing, what's maybe missing from this guidance, just because obviously, as you mentioned, things will come up as these actually go live. I also imagine sort of after the year mark, when we're getting into 2025, I think we'll potentially need to have some additional updates based on how things are going with the minimum option calculation and information there, or any other additional information related to that specific piece of how it impacts FCTC.
Yeah, we do have Nicole Stapp. She's our OPA 4, who will be working on some of the updates as they come along, because when you change 110 rules in a forest practice rules, there's bound to be issues with some of those rules as time goes on. So she'll be the spirit, no, I'll say that she'll be the one kind of spearheading it, I guess. Taking a look at all those changes that happen as time goes on. Just keep in mind, like I think Abigail's mentioned here too, is this tax credit officially doesn't really take, I mean, it kicks in 2025. I mean, well, it kicks in 2024, but you can't claim it until 2025. So I'm sure, like she's saying, there will be stuff in a couple of years anyway too, as well. So.
Okay, good question. Thanks, Glenn. Oh, Amanda, one last thing. I'll call on you, Amanda, and then we're going to switch over to Ben, who I see is patiently waiting for us. But Amanda?
Yeah, this should be quick. Just for Josh on the SFIsh, you just made me think of this and the question that Glenn asked on the timeline. I assume that there will be, and maybe I shouldn't, but I assume that there will be a period in time that you guys are accepting applications for SFIsh, and then a period of time that the review team will be reviewing those, and then awards will be notified. So is that what you're working on right now to develop that process? Just because this is going to happen very quickly. January 1st will be here before we know it. And so, you know, I want to inform our members, especially that might be interested in helping landowners apply for these, just to know what that timeline is going to look like moving forward.
Yeah, I know, and that is actually kind of the timeline, and I won't talk too much on it. Like in terms of like review cycles, I think in this first year it's going to be fairly like undefined, and we'll better kind of figure that out as we see the volume and frequency. But in terms of the application, really, once the door is open, the door is always open. But yes, we will have to set some given time periods that, hey, we're going to look at what's in the program right now. Applications can continue to come in, but you know, this is the set that's in the program. We're going to look at those. We're going to award some money. But yeah, so that exact cycle, it's probably more of just, I'm going to figure it out in this first year what that really needs to look like based on the frequency of applications we do get, and then we'll have a little bit more defined cycles as we, you know, deliver in the future years. I know that's a very vague answer, but once it's open, it's always open. It's just a matter of, like, say, when we kind of decide that we're going to look at what's in the program and award some money, and then we're going to do that again at some other date, right?
So just so I can be clear, as clear as we can be right now, the advice would be more or less like get these applications done and the RCAs done as soon as you can. But at this point, there is no set date for they must be in by a set date to be eligible for this year's funding opportunity, which I guess is going to make people, I don't know, feel one way or the other, but that just implies, you know, get it done as quickly as you can if you know you're gonna, if you know that your client might be interested, or as a landowner you might be interested in applying for this money.
Yeah, no, that's the advice I would give. And you know, I will figure something out sooner than later with regards to, hey, you know, this first set, we're gonna, you know, whatever's in by February, the end of February, you know, we're gonna look at it and try and get some money out so some projects can be delivered, you know, in the in-water work window of 2024. You know, that would be kind of my best guess. It's going to be something along those lines, but maybe it's something we do have to go push out to March because we don't have that many applications or whatever it might be. So
yeah, or the RCAs are taking longer than expected or something. Yeah. Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, thank you all. Good discussion, and we'll go to Ben. Our next item on the agenda is Ben talking to us about the forestry program for Oregon update. Ben, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me. And yeah, a couple thoughts to sort of get us started here. One, at our last CFF meeting, when I sort of floated this idea of having some, you know, a agenda item around this, we were really hoping to have the draft done at the board and department level. That is not the case. So we had a really constructive board meeting down in Medford last month and made a lot of progress, but are still very much in the working on the draft phase. And ODF has sort of a formal process that will be in February, it sounds like, for sort of taking the draft that we come up with and shopping around to as many people and groups as possible to sort of have a public comment period. So I just wanted to sort of separate our conversation today from that more formal, multifaceted sort of public comment period. And that will be coming in February. And I hope we can maybe have another one of these at that point. I thought it would be worth sitting down and working on this together just for my own personal benefits. I think because there's still we're getting to the point where there's some sort of more challenging issues that we're wrestling with. And the more feedback we can get on this to sort of get outside of our echo chamber of our little subcommittee, I think is really helpful. And getting the small forest landowner perspective is always really valuable. And so I pulled out sort of two primary topics that I thought would be worth digging into. But we can sort of dig into those and I can sort of set those up, but also happy, there is a draft that I think you all have looked at or have had. That was the draft we had going into our last board meeting. I don't expect anybody to have watched the 4 hours of conversation, but Kate, if you did, that's awesome. And great. Okay, well, that's fantastic. So you guys are up to speed on this, yeah. So happy to entertain feedback on anything in that document. And just a little point of order, we've changed the name to the Vision for Oregon's Forests, and so going forward, it's still a working title. Like I said, it's still a draft, but I think everyone is much happier with that name than FPFO, which was a bit of a mouthful. And so the first primary sort of topic that we as a subcommittee and as a board have been wrestling with is the forest resilience goal. And a little sort of preamble to this, I think the way I and the subcommittee, and I think the board to a large extent sees this goal is, there's a lot of forest land in Oregon that's in a fairly fragile state right now. There's a lot of threats to our forests, and we can go down a whole long list of topics that we've been talking about in this committee for forever. And how do we, as a department, as forest managers, as stewards of these forests in Oregon, use the tools in our toolbox to get our forests in Oregon to a more resilient state? And the thinking behind this document is really, we want this to be bold and forward-looking and to really try to set Oregon on a course for strengthening the forest resources and the forest resilience that we have in this state. We sort of started wrestling with the word management and active management and intentional management, different words like that, to try to figure out how do we communicate very loudly and clearly. There's a lot of work to be done in the forest of Oregon. And how do we say that out loud and start to put strategies in place to do that work? And that's sort of where we're coming from. And active management was a word that was thrown around a bunch. It pushes buttons. It's a loaded word or term that we were really, I think, maybe you heard that in the board conversation, trying to stay away from words and terms that have different meanings to different people and sort of raise red flags and in the large landscape of Oregon that is folks connected to Forestlands. And but I think the intent behind it is doing good work in our forests to improve the resilience of our forests in Oregon. And so I might leave it at that and open it up to what hopefully can just be a wide-ranging conversation. And it sounds like some of you watched that video, so hats off to you. And happy to provide more context and more thinking, but I'm really interested to hear from you on particularly forest resilience.
So can I start, Ben, if that's okay? Just to correct our meeting notes for today, it was a board retreat, not a board meeting, just to kind of clarify that. So
thank you.
And also Ben's given you an update on the plan itself. I would suggest that if the Board of Forestry would like the CFF to comment on it officially, that maybe they could make an ask of it, Ben. once the draft is complete. So today I think it's just for an update, more or less, not really any kind of decision space. At least that's my understanding. Just want to make that clear for everybody. It's just an update today. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike, for that clarification. And maybe to provide a little more context, the next subcommittee meeting is next week, and we will be, as a subcommittee, which is 3 board members plus 3 or 4 or 5 staff from ODF, from the executive team, from various divisions. We'll be sort of taking all the conversation we had from the last board retreat and working on trying to come up with a much closer to final draft of this document. So yes, I didn't say it clearly, but this is an informal conversation, but one that's I selfishly feel like will be very useful for me, and hopefully can get this CFF in a place for February to be much more well prepared for the formal feedback.
Oh, lots of hands. I think Rick's hand was up first, so I'm calling on you first, Rick.
Thank you. Hey, Ben, how are you?
Doing well.
A couple things, you guys have had Robin working as a facilitator on this, and she's really good. And I'd like to make a suggestion that when we do a formal discussion, maybe we bring Robin in to help us, since she knows kind of the pre and post and the steps, and then we can structure the comments that the board needs, and we can strategize the best way to help communicate that. But I really appreciate you bringing this up and giving us lead time instead of kind of getting this dumped on us the week before the board meeting, and we have to weigh in. The second thing is my sense from attending the meetings and after the last CFF report that the board, the SFOs were on their radar screen and they're thinking about us. And so could you comment on that a little bit? Do we have to keep pushing? I don't want to rest on our laurels, but is there some work that we need to do, or host some tours and some visits?
Always, yes, keep pushing. So yes, the SFOs are definitely on the radar of the board, and I think, but that doesn't mean to rest on your laurels. I think as an interest group, SFOs are not as vocal sometimes as other interest groups, and yet you make up a very significant chunk of the forest land in Oregon. So the more engagement at the board level and department level, the better. So yes.
Thanks. Let's see, Kayla.
Thanks. And, I hope this isn't too much sort of nitpicking or line editing as it's still in draft form. I think overall, one that I had is in the glossary of terms, there should be probably a lot more definition, even just for forest land, private forest. This is, if it's a standalone document, we don't want people to have to go cross-reference other ODF rules and regulations, for example. And then forest ecosystem services, the 4 groups are not named. You might just want to put that in there. And I felt like a lot of, there's such good stuff here. I think even in the resilience section and in the others with the strategies. And I'm just sort of, I just want to check on how I read it, because this is the Board of Forestry speaking about a vision of forest management for Oregon. And it's directed, I think the ultimate user is Oregon Department of Forestry and their staff. If that's right, I feel like when we're looking at the strategies, in my mind, I put ODF staff will at the beginning of every sentence. And so is that, if that's not right, then that's fine. If it's if this is bigger picture, I think at some point it feels still very high level. And so how do we take that to implementation in a way that's useful for staff, that doesn't, change year to year or meeting to meeting? I think I know we're all working toward that goal. I just like when I read some of the climate words even like, you know, let's see, what was it? To support the existential threat of climate change. Like, how does that mean? How will that affect what the you know, Oregon Department of Forestry staff are doing in relation? Like, should we talk specifically about integrating data and using that, and, you know, a cycle on which it will be updated? Can we create a little bit more, like, from the vision to the implementation in this doc? And this may not be the right place, but if there is opportunity for that, I think that might help everybody in the long run with just sort of how this can be a durable document also.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And to I'm writing notes here on the side. So in answer to a couple of your questions, I think as far as the who the audience is, ODF, the department, definitely one of the audiences, but we're looking at it as more than just that, and really thinking it's both an inward facing and an outward facing document. Inward facing, and then it's speaking to the department, and hopefully every ODF staff person out in the field on the ground can have this in the back of their mind when they're having conversations, making decisions, interacting with the public. But it's also an outward looking document, and it's a way for the board and ODF to tell their story. And that's not necessary to communicate with the outside world. This is how we see the vision. This is our vision of forests in Oregon going forward. And so I see it as a policy document, as a document that legislators can look at and we can use to help educate. We can use it to work with other agencies. It mirrors in some ways the work of the 20-year resilience plan of sort of how do we interface with all the other agencies. This can be a tool in that. So we want it to read plainly enough that a non-technical practitioner can understand most of what's going on. And so there's a tall order to be both inward facing and outward facing at the same time. And we in general have envisioned this document as being about all forests in Oregon, all forest lands, not just forest land that is under the purview of the departments. But there is obviously a lot more in the strategy side of things, a lot more influence that the board and department has on certain parts of the forest landscape in Oregon. And so hopefully that adds a little bit of clarity of sort of what the document is supposed to be doing. And I appreciate all the feedback on how we can do a better job of that.
Thanks.
No,
Okay, go ahead, Carla. To finish. Okay, Dave. Amanda, are you?
It was. I was acknowledging Kate was before me.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said, but whoever Dave thinks should go next, go next.
Kate.
Oh, Kate. Sorry. Okay, there she is. Okay.
Thanks, Dave. Actually, I first kudos to all of you who are part of those long, whether it's meetings or retreats, because a retreat, having done actual faith work for years, a retreat and an actual meeting that you just call a retreat are not automatically the same. So kudos to all of you who did an extra meeting, even though you called it a retreat. And it was quite interesting to listen to all of it. So one question I have is, I took notes both through the listening to the 4 hours and also notes on the draft. Would those be helpful to you, Ben? Because
Yes,
perfect.
absolutely.
Happy to send them. And then just two other comments. There was definitely a lot of discussion about management and whatever adjective you put in front of it, whether it's active or passive. And I have to say passive sets my teeth on edge because, well, because if you passive is neglect. That's just walking away as though, because even if you choose not to do something, you're making a conscious decision to not interfere or whatever that might be, but you should also be paying attention and going and monitoring, and that is still active. So I maybe a pitch for intentional was actually perhaps a nice word for this broad audience that you are envisioning. And then you alluded to it, but I think one of the big elephants in the room or in the document is that it's a vision for Oregon's forest, but it really is focused much more on the third of Oregon's forests that the state and private landowners have, have actual, not so much responsibility for, but an active role they can take in making those kinds of choices, because that sort of federal versus state and private, I mean, that just sort of, that feels huge out there, because you can read this as a document that, oh, it's for all of Oregon's forests. And I can see it as an ideal vision. I think Cal talked about that it's important to have the ideals out there. But at some point, I mean, I think there's often this conflation of all the different ownerships, that, the state, we should be able to tell private landowners what they should be able to do on private property, which most of us get irritated by being told what to do, just as humans. But yeah, I don't know, and I don't know how that can be addressed, but I think that's a bit, education came up on a number of times, and I think people I know that the data is out there and the information is out there, but I do wonder how many Oregonians actually know that there are different jurisdictions responsible for different parts of the forest, and all the forests aren't the same, and that, we can't tell everyone what to do. And I think that certainly came up in terms of part of like the fire discussion, which feels really pointed for some of us who have been, within a few miles of federal forests that have burned, tens of thousands of acres, over the course of the last few years. So yeah, you guys, it's a big document. It's actually, for a very short document, it's a very big document at the same time. And I'm really grateful that we are being provided the opportunity to have some kind of voice in it, because I think, as I have said a few times, those of us who actually care for forests have much more maybe have an even more intimately personal relationship, because obviously we care about the forest, but we care about it and for it too. And so having those voices always in your heads as well, I think, is very valuable. And thank you for that.
Thanks, Kate. I am now going to jump to Dave, who I think is next in line.
Right. So I just wanted to kind of back away from the minutia here, and kind of, because your question, if I recall, was basically about forest resilience in particular. And so it seems to me, I'm going to provide you a quick boots on the ground example of what I think needs to be done, because we're kind of preaching to the choir here. We've got a subset of Oregonians. If we've got, what I think Jim James said, there's maybe 60,000 small forest landowners in Oregon, of which maybe 2,000 or so are just OSWA members. So you can see, and of that bunch, there's even a fewer subset that understand even what's going on. And so back when Senate Bill 762 was instituted, and part of that was this SFG grant program, right, for small woodland owners. And so I was asked to write a grant for that. And so what I did was I created a kind of a landscape scale of a group of small woodland owners in order to accomplish the fuels reduction, because that, I think, goes a long way toward the forest resilience, because you can solve a lot of problems by doing that. And so what was interesting about this, and the reason why I bring this up, is that of the 7 other landowners that I approached, they all, once I explained to them what needed to be done, they were all for it. It was a good public policy. They understood it. But the thing is that none of the other ones were OSWA members. They didn't know anything about the program. They really are not hands-on to their forests like all of us are. And so they really don't understand the relationships between stocking density and increased forest hazard, wildfire hazard, blah, blah, blah. And so I had to go through basically a spiel with all these people, explaining to them this whole thing. And so what I'm getting at is that, if, governments are famous for writing plans, but you have to be able to somehow take this information and convey it to these 60,000 people, because in Clackamas County in particular, small woodland owners own more forest land than industrial forest landowners. And we're closer to the rural-urban interface than most other communities are. And so this is a big deal to try to get something like this implemented. But how to get this information, A, conveyed to the common person, B, in a way that they don't think it's just another government program shoved down their neck, and see that they understand, and which was why Senate Bill 762 was so effective, that it didn't cost them anything. There was a match required, which was smart, and we were able to meet that through all these community members. Once they understood what was going on, they volunteered labor to do a lot of this that included in their match. So I think when you develop a program like this, it includes public involvement, gets them educated, believes it's not a big government ram down your throat sort of a program, that it'll be effective. But it just has to be advertised in a way. Otherwise, this isn't going to happen, I don't think.
Thanks, Dave. Ben, did you want to say something? Or
No, I appreciate that very much, and I think that example is well taken. I think Kayla, you were getting at this, and Dave as well. This is there's a lot of work to do on the strategies portion of it. We've really still been focusing on the overarching goals, and this is the strategies of how the department is going to sort of realize these goals is where the rubber hits the road. And making sure we are outward looking and clear and able to reach and educate and communicate in the way that we need to in order to be successful in these strategies, I think is really important. And so I have a lot of notes here. Thank you.
Just quickly, just to kind of follow up on that, one suggestion I had, I was on our school board for a lot of years, and we created what we called a group of key communicators. So what we did was we had public policy from the district and the board that needed to be disseminated out to, everybody, all the citizens of the district. And so we relied on a group of people, in this case, they could be OSWA members or whoever, that would then reach out to their neighbors and tell them about these programs and what's important, because it benefits all of us, to have a neighbor that employs fuels reduction measures or whatever it's going to be to make the forest more resilient. But in order to do that, they have to trust those people and believe they're not, just some government employee. And so if there was a way to do that and intertwine that with this overall strategy, I think that might go a long way.
Absolutely.
Amanda?
Yeah, Ben, it's nice to see you. Thanks for being here with us today. So to kind of piggyback a little bit on Kate's comments, I just wanted to get clarity. I thought there had been conversations that there would be a call out box specifically focused around the different types of landowners and jurisdictions. Is that still going to happen? Do you know?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm remembering now that you mentioned this, that we did talk about that at one point. Sort of a context setting box of like, who are the different ownership groups that we're talking about here? Something like that.
Yeah. And what is ODF's role in partnering with them? Because like Kate said, and I know that there's some stuff in there around shared stewardship, and our ability to work across boundaries through those types of mechanisms. But the SFO piece, I'm not sure if there's been a lot of discussions about how that gets weaved into that call out box, or if it needs a separate definition or something. There might be more work that could be done on incorporating the SFO piece into the document. And I think that's what you're hearing a little bit from this group of how do we not get looped in or wrapped in with the larger context of private land ownership, because there's different needs and different ways of communicating and different programs and different opportunities as it relates to kind of the small forest landowner context as we think about the vision for Oregon's forests more broadly. So I just wanted to highlight that, and maybe that's something to bring back to the subcommittee.
I wanted to just say yes, Amanda, because I felt like when I was reading through the document, like, where all the small forest land owners, if it could be part of the vision, would be that small forest land owners are very important stewards of a high percentage of our forests, and they have specific ways of managing their forests, and to be supportive of that group, especially in terms of avoiding conversion and maybe synchronizing that with our land use laws. That could be an important part of the vision, and I didn't see it so far. But speaking a bit out of turn, I see that I think, Julie, you haven't spoken yet. If I'll do you and then Rick, if that's okay.
Okay. Ben, so just wanting to bring back, I think it is really important, and OFRI, of course, works closely with the department for like the Oregon Forest Facts booklet, where we really can set up, not only who owns the forest, but I think it'd be important to show the forest change across Oregon. We have some really simple, diagrams of the state of Oregon that also show that. So I would be, just encouraged to look at the Oregon Forest Facts booklet that we work with the department on. There's some really simple, easy public consumption that I think really helps set up the story for what you're talking. And then I just also would like to mimic, talking with the public a lot about forestry right now, the word plan. There, I think I encourage you to start thinking about this because this is more of a vision. And now we have a lot of habitat conservation plans and management plans. Like we're throwing a lot of plans out to the public. And this really is more of a vision that is, you want people to grab onto this. And so I just would caution from having a lot of interaction with the public about, there's a lot of conversations about plans, and plans to them are now becoming something that can impact their communities, can impact their workforce, can impact their future. And so I would also, just from that public standpoint, think about this isn't a requirement. This is your like a big vision, a bigger goal, versus saying like this is the work plan. This is things to strive towards. And so I just want to caution, because I think we're throwing a lot at the public right now from forestry with all these different things that are happening and management plans, HCPs, all these different things. So just to keep that in mind as the language of this.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And we've had the very similar conversations that this is very much a vision for Oregon's forest. This is not a plan. This might inform various plans, hopefully will, but it is not that. It is very much a vision with a set of high level goals, and it's up to the department and stakeholders to figure out how do we implement that vision and goals with various plans, but this is not that. So I wholeheartedly agree and appreciate that feedback.
Thank you. Rick?
Yeah, thanks. Some of us have kind of gone through this process before in the various hearings, and there's always some inflection point where it becomes us versus them, and you can define that either way, however you want to do it: private landowners or public landowners, or bigs or smalls, or whatever. But a couple things, Ben, I wanted to, I think we bring to the table, and that is the word voluntary. That is something that we believe strongly in, that if you set something up and it's good and valuable, people will make good decisions. And so voluntary versus regulation and prescription is something that we feel strongly about, and I think works well with our community. And the other thing is incentives. And, how can we incent landowners who are actively managing, or landowners that aren't doing anything, to do better or do something different? So I just want to bring that. Those are kind of key words for us, voluntary and incentives.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I see Eric's hand up.
Yes, good morning, Ben. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to maybe piggyback a little bit on what some of Rick said. When you're at PDX and you jump in an airplane and you go up to 25,000 feet and you look down, we see this patchwork, a quilt of different management styles. And from the perspective of this committee, I think the strength of the small landowner ownership is in its variety of management styles and objectives. And regarding the resilience comment in the forestry plan for Oregon, I think it's to look for incentives that ensure that we keep our working forests working. I think one of the biggest threats that we have right now is passive ownership, both in large landowners and small landowners, and the threat that challenges for forest health in Oregon.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. And we've struggled with this, and I feel like that's passive ownership was not a term that was at the forefront of my tongue here, and I that's a useful term as a foil of what we're working against, I feel like. So do you I'd love to push that a little more, of sort of more specific examples of passive ownership, because I've kind of referenced that at times, but I don't know that I've got very good examples of that.
I guess I would, just off the top of my head, I would throw out there that, you know, if as we deal with more and more challenges statewide with wood flow that's coming onto our market, and that's challenging our manufacturing centers and our employment in the natural resources field, you know, as certain portions of our state are challenged by having less of a robust manufacturing center, you know, there's less choice available to how you choose to manage your land based on how you're able to deliver products into a market. And I think that really challenges some of our critical forest management and some of our forest health goals of, you know, being able to capture carbon from some of those projects. I would also say that maybe from a regulatory standpoint, you know, my biggest fear with the new PFA rules is that we create a situation with small woodland owners where they are that feel burdened by the new rules and decide to be either passive or just exit forestry in total due to the increased workload associated with it. Those are probably the two off the top of my head.
Thank you.
I'll just jump in and say, Eric, I appreciate that, and I put something in the chat. I'm sorry to interrupt the raising of hands, but just I wonder about a goal that's more about, like, you know, I don't think we can have no net loss of forest land as a goal, but that we want to minimize forest loss and conversion, and that we want to, you know, in the resilient community strategy, that we encourage healthy wood products markets as well. Like, I think that there are some ways to sort of, you know, even at a higher level than these, I think these goals are fantastic, but just above them, like how are those like resilient communities and resilient forests also sort of require that the forest land exists. And I think we need to say really clearly that Oregon is a state that is heavily forested, which presents a number of opportunities, and that we value them for a number of reasons. And that's where you have the federal state, you know, maybe that's where you go into different ownership and different strategies for each landowner type. Because I think as you get more specific, it gets more exciting.
Yeah.
I'm going to raise my hand if I could and call on myself. Yeah, thanks for those comments, everyone. Great input. I was thinking about the condition of the forest and the ecosystem health being a determinant of how the forest should essentially be treated or managed or whatever. I thought the comment in the draft about management being a somewhat problematic term is very true, because I think sometimes in industrial circles, management just means harvest, essentially land that is primarily managed for harvest. On the other hand, coming from more from the land trust community, like we manage forests for a number of things. If we get high quality habitat, just use an example, we might keep that intact and have a carbon project on it, or we might have land that is harvested, but is harvested to create sort of a late sterile environment that has the overarching goal of habitat at the same time as generating revenue. Or there might be forest land that is long-standing industrial forest land that might be managed for a primarily harvest-based, you know, but on a longer rotations. There are lots of different things, and it determines the tool that can be used really depends on the condition of the forest and what benefits it is currently providing. So I feel a little bit the discussion that's based on the management tool isn't really the goal. The health of the forest and what it can produce is really the goal. And big picture, thinking about your document, I would just say in a cautionary way, you know, so I like having a vision, but sometimes when you move to like a facilitated conversation about vision, in order to get consensus, you move to very vague terms, a little bit like the comment statements, like what can we all agree on? We can agree on something that's a principle, but doesn't have action steps. So I'd say I hope in the document that it will, like, when there ends up being a discussion of different ways to achieve a goal, instead of trying to discuss a lot which way is best and then having a compromise that is vague, maybe say that there are these ways to achieve goals of resilience, and you could manage for different kinds of forests. Include those options rather than going for a rather vague statement of principle. And I know that can be hard to do because you want to get everyone on board, but sometimes you can move in the direction of some rather general statements. Yeah, Okay, that was my hand raised. Next
Just to-
person, please. Oh, Ben, did you want to say something?
I was just, Kate, I want to hear what you have to say. I was just wanted to follow up on Wendy, that thank you. That is, I have struggled with exactly that. And I have struggled with how do we, sometimes we've chosen to try to not use examples in this document, because then we start getting the argument of what is in and what is out. What is an example, and did we leave out an example that we should have put in? But you're right, the goal is not management, the goal is resilient forests, but the goal is actively working towards more resilient forests. And but using the word active management doesn't fly very well. And so it's been a challenge for us to try to put that into a sentence or two of, but I think you summed it up very much, my thinking of working towards more resilience in our forests, and we need to be working hard at that. So I wrote some notes.
Well,
thanks.
And bouncing off that, Wendy, because I thought that one of the parts of the conversation that that group on that retreat was talking about was, is there an, incentivizing diversity of species, or actually even making that possible, whether it's a post-harvest or post-salvage or post-fire, that it becomes, there's a bit of a complicated dance that can happen of wanting to maintain your forest status, because that may make it possible for small woodland owners to continue to have a woodland, to not have it, because it has property tax implications and such. But if the push is to reforest with a very specific set of species, that doesn't incentivize more diversity of species. And that one can, so I think how those can work together toward actual climate resilience and responsiveness to things that are shifting. I mean, I know, just our very personal experience of finding that however much people tell us that ours is great Douglas fir ground, the only trees that are really not surviving right now are Douglas fir. I mean, other species are surviving and thriving a little bit more. And it's like, what kind of openness will there be to maybe expanding some of those acceptable species, or, what should be the rules around, free to grow status and stocking levels and things. And so some of that, moving toward resiliency may be looking at that as well. So that's more just a plug for some of that, different conifers, more hardwoods, some of those other sorts of things. Yeah.
Amanda?
Yeah, Ben, I can't remember if there's going to be any additional expansion of the sort of introduction, but kind of similar to what Wendy was saying, like, I feel like there needs to be more of a focused or bold, like, problem or issues statement on why this is needed. Like, why do we need a vision for Oregon's forests? And there is some information in the introduction and kind of context, but it doesn't really get to the heart of the issue to me. So is there going to be additional work on that? Or is that something that, this group might be able to provide additional comments on when we do kind of formal comments from this committee, or you garner more comments from the public? Just kind of want to know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think there was at times there was sort of a placeholder for an introduction, and that kind of, I think, fell by the wayside. And we had these sort of various it's not in front of me right now, the 2 pages that we kind of have there, but I wrote that. I appreciate this sort of start with a problem statement of sort of why do we have this document, and the reason for being. I think that could be helpful. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think just to follow up quickly, I think that would help tie all the different goals together, because I know that there's been a lot of struggle because there's a lot of strategies that perhaps address each of the goals, like, one strategy that could be looped in. And there's been a lot of kind of consternation over, well, which one does this actually fit into? It kind of addresses all of them. And so maybe a way to get around that and to be able to tie all those things in is to really pull those into that more larger problem or purpose or issue statement at the onset of the document that then allows you to go more into specifics within each one of the goals.
Absolutely.
Comments?
Well, Wendy, should we pivot to fire for a couple minutes?
Sounds good.
The fire goal, for lack of a better way of framing it, I think is a little squishier still. As you, from the folks who watched the recording, we're still struggling to figure out what exactly we're trying to do here. But I think I would just be really curious to hear from you all how you all think of fire, and what this, if you were writing this document, what you would want to see in here when it comes to fire. And I think particularly from the perspective of small forest landowners, what's your nexus with fire? And, Kate, I'm looking at you. I know you have a direct nexus there, but I think we all do in various degrees. And how do we frame our relationship with fire in this document? And whether it's a goal or a policy statement or a call out box, or however we end up framing it, what do we need to say about fire?
I thought that was a really interesting part of the conversation when we listened to it, because like Jim Kelly was really clear, pushing really hard on like a strong statement about, the value of prescribed fire, or and shifting the name, sort of even the name of that goal from wildfire response to fire response. And it ties into a number of the other ones where that education piece is, I think, important. What does fire look like on the landscape? And, there's been a push on good fire, but that seems to have done this pendulum swing for a lot of folks that, oh, now all fire is good fire. And it's like, well, no, some fire is good fire and some fire is catastrophic and disastrous. And how do we educate to understand those different ways that we interact with fire on the landscape, understanding how fire is fought, how fire is how fire in itself can be a management tool, how firefighting is paid for. There is so much where education and understanding where it actually helps resilient forests be more resilient, and where we need to help forests be more resilient to fire. I think there's a huge education piece in there. And then how do we, to your point of, yes, we've had a very personal interaction with fire. How do we recover? Eric has too. How do we recover post-fire, and what does that return to resilience look like? And where are there supports, and options and things in that? So, that one's, I think, a huge one. And then, I think Carla had brought up a thing about firefighter safety and how we respond to that post-fire environment. Where do you take out, where do you salvage some of that wood so that it holds on to its carbon, which fits into the carbon goal as well, that kind of climate smart strategy? And where do you leave some of that wood leave some of that wood in the forest for the services, for the goods that provides? But how do you balance that so that there isn't just more fuel on the landscape to be the next fire, and then more hazard to potentially, kill more firefighters, which does not seem to be that seems to be a bad thing. So, it's a really, I think, hugely complicated issue right now, and one that we don't necessarily know enough about. Both individual, small woodland owners or big woodland owners, or certainly not the public at large.
Kayola?
Yeah, Kate, I would just piggyback on your comment. I think it almost feels like you could have a fire education and then a wildfire in the forest section, because I do feel like, I mean, it still blows my mind when folks in Portland are like, oh, we had a great fire season this year, because they didn't have any smoke and they have no idea what's actually going on. And I think that this really ties to, I mean, forests are complex, managing is complex. There are many different ways to do it. For every Oregonian to see themselves in the forest is, I think, important for our drinking water for so many reasons, but especially when it comes to fire, that 70% of fires are started by people, that many of those people are coming from urban areas, that there's no connection to or accountability for that. I think that ties into the tax conversation that we're having, so that we can see this as an all Oregon issue and an all Westerners issue that is not separate. Like, it's not, wildfire suppression is, you know, a piece of it, not all of it by any means, but it's also not something that should only be on forest landowners, I strongly believe. So how do we sort of set up the conversation to you know, I think the education is maybe it's just education in general, and fire is a big part of education, but so is climate, and so is the fact that, you know, you may not like clear cuts, you may want to manage for habitat, but all of that forest land is contributing more than other land uses would to these goals of climate and resilience. And so how do we start like telling a very complex story? I know that, you know, we've been trying for a long time, but that feels like an even more urgent need when you put it in the wildfire context. And then I think that, you know, the need for the management or the recovery pieces for landowners are just sort of their own category. So I wonder if separating this would be helpful.
Amanda?
Oh, your hand was up too. I didn't know if you had a comment, Wendy.
I did have a comment, but I thought it was nicer to call on you first. So I'm calling on you first.
That's very nice of you. So I also sit on the Environmental Justice Council, the Governor's Environmental Justice Council. And so as it relates to wildfire and thinking about smoke burdens and the health effects of smoke and the way in which fire, you know, catastrophic fire affects communities, is that something that could be incorporated in here? I mean, it's a little bit challenging whenever we're creating these reports or plans or strategies or visions, right? It's like, okay, well, you can wait for the next thing, and then you just are waiting indefinitely for new things. And so we don't have the environmental justice mapping tool developed yet to identify environmental justice communities, but broadly, is that something that the board would be interested in including in the wildfire section?
Probably, yeah. I mean, at a base level, absolutely. You start pulling on these threads and they never finish unraveling. And there's less of a direct nexus with ODF and our ability to do things about community health and smoke. That falls in, not to pass the buck to other departments, but I think this is a classic example of where collaborating with other departments is key. And I know ODF is always collaborating and trying to figure out how do we get more flexibility to do prescribed burns and have smoke in the off season. But I think collaborating with community health and smoke effects with our partner agencies is key here. And so yeah, no, I mean, definitely, I think my wheels are spinning about how do we work this in, because it's an important component of this. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just thinking about how small forest landowners and family forest landowners really, I would argue, you know, carry a lot of that brunt as far as the environmental burden or environmental justice concerns, being that rind, being that WUI really interface between where fires typically start and where fires can move, right? I just think that it's, to me, as far as this group, there's a critical importance there. So how it gets worked in, I guess that's up to you guys, but just to highlight it.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. That links well to what I was going to say. And it reminds me of the fact that in the draft document, there are places where it refers to forests being a threat. And I thought, like, that doesn't seem quite right to me. It's partly that because a resilient forest is not a threat. The threats are often caused by either a forest that's like overstocked, even age, and that is more of a fire threat than a well-managed and resilient forest. But certainly fire in the forest, especially surrounding communities that are not well placed to have municipal and firefighting services in an efficient way. I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster. So to me, like part of the vision should be avoiding conversion in the sense, especially of not having development away from forestry uses into communities that are remote and really are not effectively defensible communities, that they burn up all the monies that are available for fighting fires, and then no less money is left over for fighting, early start fires out in forest land. I think that's a real dynamic here, and it relates to the smoke burden and other things like that. But I think that like in Washington State, especially, land trusts are involved in situations where there are communities that are really put in remote areas, and we, like land trusts, work with community partners, including the counties, to try and avoid this just sort of a sitting duck kind of community out in very flammable forest land. Julie, I think, had her hand up, and then Eric. We're running out of time, but each of you give you a couple minutes.
Thanks, Wendy. And I know this has been part of some conversations, but I don't see it reflected as much between either the resilient communities or the wildfire. And the last time we did this plan, there was a lot of talk around collaboratives. And I think the collaborative work we've seen really effective in communities. And I think about like My Blue Mountain Woodlands and the work Willow Resources and others have done to bring communities together for wildfire and a lot of other forest health. And I just look at that work is never done, and more communities could do that, whether they're doing it through, putting together a fire plan for their community or things. And so I would just encourage maybe some more look in there of like collaboratives and community, response plans together, or just things that are both either in resilience or wildfire, but really that collaborative. Because I think about, OSU Extension, their new fire program is still a pretty young, and that opportunity for collaboratives, and just we see the community response when people can work together in those type of community events of what they can do as that kind of coalition. And so I think that was more prevalent in the last plan, and maybe didn't get carried forward as much because it's like, oh, everyone's doing it. But I would argue that that's really important to continue having a method of encouraging and funding those, much as we saw through Senate Bill 762, those collaboratives that were in place, we're able to use those funds for some really important projects.
And I think real quick, just Julie, I appreciate you calling out, because those are so huge in this state. And I think a lot of that is housed in the 20-year resilience strategy that this document relies on greatly. We reference that and say it's all there, it's all over there, and not having to sort of rewrite that. And there's obviously a lot of work to do on that as that keeps getting worked on, but that's our hope, is really sort of a lot of that work lies in that document that is a subsidiary of this vision. But I wholeheartedly agree.
Eric, I want to make sure you get a minute or two.
Okay, I'll be quick. Thanks. So Ben, I'm on both sides of the fire equation. So we inherited in the Labor Day fires, we lost 10,000 acres overnight. So 1 in every 5 acres we own disappeared. That's a huge challenge. And so in my current role in the summers, I moved more and more to a role of firefighter than forester. And so my day-to-day operations get pushed aside and I become a firefighter. That being said, when conditions are favorable, I'm now using fire as a prescribed tool. And I may very able effectively reduce a lot of slash and tonnage that's on our ownership that's a real clear and present threat to wildfire ignition and spread across the landscape. I think one of the things that we're on the cusp of in Oregon is, Oregonians are starting to get that good fire is good for us. And by using good fire, we can prevent bad fire. And if it were myself writing the forestry plan for Oregon document, I wouldn't discuss wildfire at all. I think wildfire is a result of our negative actions. If we do a good job managing our forests, wildfire, it'll still occur. We're still going to have lightning strikes, and people are careless here and there. But I think for the most part, we can keep those a lot smaller than we currently are. So I guess from my perspective, Oregon, the Department of Forestry, even though protection is a huge portion of their budget, I look at that as a negative side of the equation. And if it were me, I'd be highlighting the successes of the department. So for example, we have one of the best smoke management programs in Oregon, and I don't think anybody really even knows about it at all. I think the Forestry Plan for Oregon should be out highlighting some of the successes of the department and being able to promote resiliency and health across our forests with regard to fire. We every year we burn tens of thousands of tons of slash, and we're able to promote those or protect our smoke sensitive receptor areas and be able to keep fire out of our communities. I think that's a huge win for the department and a huge win for our landowners and even our small landowners as we start to look at fire and the wild and urban interface. So I guess from my perspective for the Forestry Plan for Oregon, I would look at fire from the standpoint of how do we use it as a tool? How do we continue to affect or protect the health of our population and do so in a way that we can put, you know, good smoke up during the best times of the year to prevent bad smoke during the worst times of the year.
I took a
Thanks,
bunch of notes. That was very well spoken. I appreciate that.
Well said. We've come to the end of our time. And I think in the interest of not respecting everyone's time, I'll call the meeting to a close unless everyone has like a very quick blurb they'd like to add. Ben, do you have a closing statement like you'd like to add?
Absolutely. Thank you all very much. And I admit that this is self-serving in many ways, and this allows me to bring a more nuanced, bigger picture back to the subcommittee as we continue to try to work on this draft. And today was incredibly helpful. And hopefully it has set up this committee to be even more impactful in February when there's a formal process for this. So this informal process has been very, very useful for me. So thank you. And as always, please reach out directly if you've got more thoughts on any of these topics. I'm happy to chat. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Ben. Thank you everyone so much for being here today, and I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. With that, I adjourn the meeting. Goodbye, everybody.